Yo, what up guys? In this video, we're gonna make cabinet doors for a kitchen project. Paint grade job. I'm gonna show you how I got to this stage where I'm at right now. I'm about halfway through the process. Decided to break this video up into 2 parts to keep it from being like an hour long. We're about halfway through. Show you how I got here. Here we go. Like I said, this is a paint grade job. So a paint grade job looks a little different than obviously a stain grade job that's grain matched and all that. That's a little more time consuming, obviously, and the labeling has to be a little more detailed. But in this video, I do go over my labeling system as far as how I label parts as I go, because as you can see, there's a lot of parts here. So like I said, I'm about halfway through my process at this point. So I'll show you how I got here. And then the second part will be the parts go to the shaper and then glue up and all that. Now also, I'm just showing you my process for how I do this. This is not it's definitely not the fastest way, but it works for me. My doors come out really nice and flat and square and straight. There's a couple steps that I take, a couple extra steps that probably take a little extra time, but the end result, it definitely pays off. I also realize not everybody's gonna have the equipment and machinery and stuff that I have. Your process probably will look a little different. This can be done. Shaker doors can be done on the table saw. They can be done on the router table. I'll be using the shaper. But yeah, so let's get into it and I'll show you how we got to this point. All right, so first step in making the doors starts right here with the plans and my cut list. I'm not gonna go into huge detail about how I make my cut list, but I do write them out by hand. A couple reasons is I like to do this. I know there's tons of programs and stuff that do this, guys, but I like to write them out. It really doesn't take me that long. This was 2 pages of door parts, and I like to write it out because it helps me get this job and get the numbers into my head. I feel like I'm more likely to, or not as likely to make a mistake unless my math is wrong, but it helps me get the numbers in my head just as I'm going and building the project. So I'm not gonna go into crazy detail on how I make my cut lists, just because it's gonna be different for every cope and stick set out there, or most. These are shaker doors, so this is gonna be different than like an OG set or whatever. The math is a little different. And the way you guys might do it is just different. So maybe we'll do a separate video one day on exactly how I do my cut list. But it works for me and it makes sense in my head. So what I'll do now is I'll go through and I'll find my linear footage of all my parts that I'm gonna need. I know I've got 10-foot stock over there. Figure out how many rips I need. I'm always gonna add a couple extra rips just because you know, I want to pick out the best pieces I can, and then I'll start ripping up material. All right, so we got all our material ripped up, and from here we're going to start breaking it down into parts. So I will go through and I'll start with the longest stuff first. I'll pick out my flattest, straightest material for my longer styles, and we'll just work our way down. Then when we get down to the small, like rails, if I have 6-inch rails or anything really under 10 inches, I will you know, put 3 or 4 of them in a piece. So if I have 4 6-inch rails, I will cut one piece, like 26 inches, something like that, and then I'll break it down after. So because from here we go to the joiner and then to the planer, so I don't want to be trying to joint and plane little tiny pieces. And then after they come out of the planer, then we take them to the slider and we cut them down to their finished size. The rails, the styles always stay long. You'll see in the end, everything is glued up oversized, and then we cut it to the finished door dimension at the end. Also, this step is probably going to take me a little longer than normal because I don't have my miter saw station built up yet, where I would have like a tape measure built into the bench here, and it makes it go really quick. I can just throw a piece up, slide it over, cut them, and knock this out quick. This, unfortunately, I'm doing with job site saw. All right, so we're gonna do this on the slider. I think it's just gonna be too slow doing it over on that miter saw without having the miter saw station set up. So I'm gonna break everything down here. One thing I wanted to mention, when I start with the end of a board, I always cut a little bit off and make sure there's not like any checks or anything in the end of it, and then I'll measure from there. All right, so I know this probably looks a little nuts, but there is a method to the madness. So the way I label everything, every door on my cut list has a number, and if they're the same size, like there might be 3 number 5s and 4 number 4s, they're all the same size. So anyways, every part gets the number and what it is. So like we've got number 10 style, number 10 style, and then in here we'd have number 10 rails. Everything gets it on the end, because then from here we're going to go to the joiner and obviously our numbers will still be there. And then after we take it to the jointer and the planer, then we take these parts and I cut my rails to finish size before we take them to the shaper. This is one of the steps that takes a little bit longer. I could certainly buy all my material S4S already, and which S4S means surface four sides, so it'd already be planed down to a thickness, and then I could just chop up my parts and take them to the shaper. However, I like milling all my own stuff because I can guarantee that that stuff is going to be flat and straight and square and all that. So it takes a little bit longer, but I'm always going to do this. Break my parts into manageable sizes and then take them to the joiner. So when I'm joining my parts, I'm going to look down it, and if it has a slight bow in it, I'm typically going to put the crown up. And when I go over the cutters, I'm not pushing down, right? I'm just sliding my piece over to take the bow out, because if I push down and run this thing over, the bow is just going to come right back. So it's not really doing what I want to do. I want to get rid of that bow. So I'm just going to take light passes and just lightly push this thing through without pushing down in the middle, right? Until I get that bow out. And then I'll hit the edge, and then it's good to go. And then I'll take all my parts to the planer once I'm done with this step. All right, so we're finished at the joiner. Now we're gonna plane everything down. So I am using 5/4 stock. I like my doors finish at 15/16 to 7/8. I like to do that. It's kind of a nicer feel door, having a little thicker, and it kind of sets me apart from other shops, stuff like that. Another thing, I'm using poplar for all my paint grade stuff. I used to use maple, and I switched to poplar a couple years ago. Just machine's way nicer. This stuff that I get from my lumber yard is really dry and dried well and all that. And the climate here is also very dry. There's not a lot of humidity. So I've been making them out of poplar for years. Never had a callback on a door warping or anything like that. I know some of you guys are probably gonna not like that, but whatever. I like to use poplar. The milling process is really probably the most important part of making doors and making sure they're flat and all that. If my doors are warped a little bit, they're not going to line up and be all nice and flush and flat across the face. So I kind of take pride in the fact that my doors come out really nice. So milling, when I take a pass at the joiner, like I said, I'm taking light passes. I'm not pushing down. I'm just kind of taking any little bow or anything out of that. Picking the material to use is super important too. I don't really want a piece that has a huge bow in it and plane it down, because there's already some kind of tension or anything in it if it bowed like that when it dried. So I want to pick the straightest, flattest material right from the start and then go from there. Another thing is, now I'm going to take them, run everything through the planer, and I want to make sure I'm taking an equal amount off each side. So if I take a 1/4 inch off one side and a 16th off the other side, that thing is going to bow. The more I take off of one side, the more it's going to do this. So I really want to make sure I'm taking an equal amount off each side as we go, and that's just going to help these things stay nice and straight and flat. All right, make a lot of sawdust, milling up that much material. Get this thing emptied out. I use these, obviously these bags. I'll try and reuse them. Like I'll empty this out. I'll try and reuse them a few times until they get all ripped up and I can't really use it anymore. But try and get a couple of uses out of them. This thing's gonna make a mess. Not bad. All right, I had to move the dumpster so I could pick it up in the morning. All right, so everything is milled up, flat, square, parallel, all that stuff. So now I will cut my rails down to their finished dimension. The slider, the stiles I don't cut, I leave them long. So the label will still be there on the stile. It's obviously going to get cut off on the rails on the ends right now when I cut them, so I'll label them with a pencil on the face of the rails as I go. That way when I go to glue up, I can just match up the numbers and take the parts. All right, so that is it. Hopefully this video is helpful. Maybe you learned something. The second part will be taking the parts to the shaper and coping all the rails and then running all the rails and stiles through my other shaper. And then I do have a few, actually I don't really have any tiny rails on this project. No, I do have a couple small ones. So the small ones, I'll show you what we do with those too to run the profile. For shaker doors, I just take them to the table saw to run that groove because I can't run little rails through the shaper safely, really. If I had to do it, if I was doing a different profile with like an OG or something, I would make a little sled to run it through the shaper. However, with shaker doors, you don't need to do that. So yeah, the rest of the next video will be shaper and then cutting the panels, which really isn't that exciting, and then glue up, sand the doors through the drum sander, and then cut them to size. So yeah, like I said, hopefully you guys learned something. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, leave me any questions you have down below. I'll try to answer them the best I can, and see you guys on the next one.